What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another video. So obviously at the end of every NFL season, we are crowned a Super Bowl champion. We have one team out of the 32 taking home the Lombardi. Sometimes it's a true underdog story, a team that no one expected to be at the top at the beginning of the season, before the season, finding themselves at the top of the NFL world. Sometimes it's a dynasty, adding another Lombardi to their trophy case amongst a plethora of many others. Sometimes it's a team that's been competitive for the past 2 years, finally getting themselves over the hump, so on and so forth. You get the gist. Obviously, this past year with Super Bowl 60, we saw the Seattle Seahawks take home the Lombardi Trophy, the second in their franchise's history. And to me, it is super fascinating to look back on how Seattle constructed this championship-winning roster. To put it simply, the Seahawks, and more specifically GM John Schneider, put forth gamble after gamble, ballsy decision after ballsy decision, and every single one worked out as well as it possibly could have. So sit back, grab a drink, because we got to go a little ways back to truly understand how this Seattle Seahawks Super Bowl winning roster truly came to be. And this story begins after the conclusion of the 2021 season. Coming off a 7-10 season in 2021, Seattle's first losing season in 10 years, they were met with a tough reality that their championship window from the Legion of Boom years and the years following was officially closed. It was an incredibly frustrating season for Seattle, coming off their one-and-done stint in the playoffs the season before. Russell Wilson missed the first game of his career after a finger injury in Week 5. The Seahawks went 1-2 in his absence, then 4-5 down the stretch upon his return. Given this window was closed, that meant roster turnover was in order, and it started with the starting QB. Russell Wilson, a former third-round pick in 2012, turned the greatest quarterback in Seahawks history, Super Bowl 48 champion as well, was traded to the Denver Broncos. Given they were trading an established franchise quarterback, though, Seattle got a capital H haul. 2 first-rounders, 2 second-rounders, tight end Noah Fant, quarterback Drew Lock, and defensive end Shelby Harris. The same can't be said for franchise cornerstone linebacker Bobby Wagner, as he was released and later signed with a division rival Los Angeles Rams. They were the last 2 remaining pieces from the 2013 Super Bowl winning roster until Bruce Irvin later returned that offseason. However, this did not mean Seattle was rolling over. They spent the new cap space quite a bit in free agency, grabbing Uchenna Nwosu from the Chargers. The Wilson trade got Seattle back into the first round of the draft, which they had previously lost in the Jamal Adams trade. With the 9th pick, Seattle grabbed tackle Charles Cross out of Mississippi State. Not to spoil anything, but the Seahawks laid the foundation for the next couple of years over draft weekend this year. They cleaned up in this draft, and I think that's putting it lightly. Edge rusher Boye Mafe out of Minnesota at 40, running back Kenneth Walker out of Michigan State at 41, tackle Abraham Lucas out of Washington State at 72, and cornerback Tariq Woolen out of UTSA at pick 153. In training camp and the preseason, the quarterback job was surprisingly won by longtime backup and journeyman Geno Smith, beating out the younger and aforementioned Drew Lock. Coming into the season, many cast off the Seahawks, thinking that coming off of the offseason that they had, this would be a rebuilding year, as they were projected to win around 5 games. And many thought this would be made evidently clear this was a new era of Seahawks football, as they were matched up with familiar face Russell Wilson and his Broncos on Monday Night Football in Week 1. Seeing as a Broncos fan, this was worst case scenario for the Broncos to start the 2022 season, so that means it was actually best case scenario for the Seahawks. In his debut as the full-time starting quarterback, Geno Smith threw for 195 yards and 2 touchdowns, and the defense played out of its mind against their former quarterback, forcing 2 goal line fumbles, as the Seahawks, as 6.5-point underdogs, beat the Broncos 17-16. The next 2 weeks, though, seemed to prove that the forecast of a rebuilding year was right, though, as Seattle lost 27-7 at San Francisco, then 27-23 to the Falcons, and they later sat at 2-3 after a 39-32 loss to the Saints, and all signs pointed to this being another shaky Seattle defense, much like the previous years. Then something just flipped. A 19-9 win over the Cardinals started it, and Seattle rattled off a couple more after that. 37-23 over the Chargers, 27-13 over the Giants, and 31-21 again over the Cardinals. All of a sudden, the Seahawks were on a 4-game heater and sitting at 6-3. This offense was proving that if their defense could just give them a solid game, they could do enough to deliver a Seattle victory, led by Geno Smith, who put up some solid passing numbers in this win streak. 197, 210, 212, and 275, and at least 2 touchdown passes in all except that 19-9 win over Arizona. This win streak is also when rookie running back Kenneth Walker got going. Starting with the win over the Chargers, he put up very solid numbers, 167 against the Chargers and 109 against the Cardinals, and at least 1 rushing touchdown in each game of that winning streak. The streak did come to an end against Tom Brady's Buccaneers the next week as Seattle headed into their bye at a very respectable 6-4. Seattle stumbled out of their bye though, going 1-4 in their next 5 despite some solid performances by Geno Smith. Sitting at 7-8, Seattle entered playoff mode early. They got a good draw though, getting the struggling Jets and Rams in weeks 17 and 18. Seattle handled business against the Jets, then they got a thrilling OT win over the Rams 19-16 to wrap up the 2022 season 9-8. Then with the Packers losing to the Lions in the season finale, Seattle claimed the final spot in the NFC playoffs. The feel-good story came to an end the following week in San Francisco as Seattle fell 41-23, but this season was still a massive success for Seattle. Geno Smith was the story of this team as he threw for 4,282 yards, 30 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, and a 100.9 passer rating as he took home Comeback Player of the Year award. Rookie running back Kenneth Walker took over the backfield as well. He rushed for 1,050 yards and 9 touchdowns. Not only this, all those picks the Seahawks got from Denver, it turns out Denver had the worst offense in the league with Russell Wilson and professional dipshit Nathaniel Hackett as they went 5-12, meaning Seattle was in possession of both their own pick in the draft and the 5th overall pick as well. Heading into 2023, Seattle had some newfound expectations. Gone were the days of planning for the future, trying to build a core centered around the future. Seattle's new priority was putting a legit team out there and a legit contender within the NFC out on the football field. The offseason started with a bang, bringing back franchise legend Bobby Wagner after a 1-year absence from the team, as well as bringing in safety Julian Love from the Giants and defensive end Draymond Jones from the Broncos. And with the surprise playoff run, the Seahawks were able to bring back almost all of their effective players from the previous season. Their 2023 draft wasn't quite on the level as their 2022 draft in terms of depth, but their top 2 picks in the first round were absolute home runs. At pick number 5, Seattle scooped up the first of a deep and high-end cornerback class out of Illinois, Devin Witherspoon. Then, with the 20th pick, Seattle lucked out in the fact that no receivers in the deep class had been taken yet. Spoiler alert, the Seahawks scooped up a future Offensive Player of the Year award winner, and who a number of people believe was the best in his class. Wide receiver out of Ohio State, Jackson Smith-Njigba. Then in the second round at pick 52, Seattle scooped up running back out of UCLA, Zach Charbonnet. Coming into the season, Seattle was projected to win around 8 to 9 games, around the same as last year, maybe a little low considering their offseason. After a rough start in week 1 and a 30-13 loss to the Rams, the Seahawks hit their stride, winning 3 in a row to sit at 3-1 at their early bye, then later 5-2. And with this hot start, Seattle bought at the trade deadline, sending a 2024 second-round pick and a 2025 fifth-round pick to the Giants for defensive lineman Leonard Williams. Seattle then headed into a huge matchup at the 6-2 Baltimore Ravens. The game went about as bad as it could have, as the Ravens got out to a 17-3 halftime lead, then just did not slow down, dominating the Seahawks by a score of 37-3. Geno Smith flat out was terrible in this game, completing less than 50% of his passes, and obviously as indicated by the score, the whole team was also terrible. Seattle got back on track the next week with a win over the Commanders, but this Ravens loss really set the tone for the rest of the season. Seattle followed this up with a 4-game losing streak, which included 3 divisional losses, 2 of which were to the 49ers, and a 41-35 loss to the 8-3 Cowboys, who they were jockeying with for playoff position. Geno Smith also suffered an injury and missed 2 games, one of which was one of those losses to the 49ers. The other was a Monday night game against the Eagles, in which backup Drew Lock actually led the upset, beating the Eagles 20-17 to get the Seahawks back to 7-7. This was actually the start of the Seahawks going 3-1 down the stretch to finish 9-8. However, that one loss came in week 17 to the Steelers and cost the Seahawks the ability to control their own destiny in the final week. The Cards did not fall Seattle's way in week 18 as they missed the playoffs. Geno Smith threw for 3,624 yards, 20 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, and a 92.1 passer rating in 15 starts. Kenneth Walker saw similar production as last year, tallying 905 rushing yards and 8 touchdowns on the season. And star receiver DK Metcalf saw another great season, tallying 1,114 yards and 8 touchdowns on only 66 catches. Despite good production on the roster, Seattle failed to improve upon their surprise season from the year before. The beginning of the 2024 offseason began with probably the most shocking news possible to come out of Seattle. the Seahawks agreed to part ways with head coach Pete Carroll, who had been the head coach since 2010, and again, this came after a 9-win season. General manager since 2013, Schneider, felt that this move was best for the team's success going forward. In their head coaching search, the Seahawks landed on Ravens defensive coordinator Mike Macdonald, making him the youngest head coach in the league at age 37. The Seahawks let a couple of players walk: safety Jamal Adams, safety Quandre Diggs, linebackers Bobby Wagner, Jordan Brooks, and Devin Bush all departed in free agency. The Seahawks went about their usual strategy of improving their team through the draft rather than free agency. With the 16th pick, they scooped up defensive end out of Texas Byron Murphy. Then later in the 4th round with the 121st pick, they picked tight end out of Michigan AJ Barner. Coming into the season, the Seahawks were projected to win around 7 games, about a normal amount of regression expected for a team led by a first-year head coach. Seattle got out to a 3-0 start with some close wins against the Broncos and Patriots, then a blowout win against the Dolphins starting a backup quarterback. But the season then flipped on its head after that. Seattle lost 3 in a row, one of which on a blocked game-tying field goal against the lowly Giants. Seattle got back to 4-3, then made a key move, swapping linebacker Jerome Baker with Titans linebacker Ernest Jones. They then dropped 2 statement games in a row to the Bills and Rams to be at 4-5 heading into the bye. The big story this season was Geno Smith, and more specifically, his turnovers. After being a safe, efficient quarterback in the 2 previous seasons, he was a turnover machine in the first portion of the 2024 season. At Seattle's bye, Smith had thrown 10 interceptions and fumbled 4 times. Kenneth Walker was also having a down year and was battling injuries. The two were likely intertwined. As through the bye, he had 398 yards on 98 carries, and on top of this, he was splitting carries with Zach Charbonnet. DK Metcalf was also having a similar season to last, as he put up 568 yards on only 35 catches at the bye. But at the bye, McDonald rallied the troops, and the Seahawks locked in. Coming out of their bye matchup with their boogeyman in the 49ers, the Seahawks picked up a huge win thanks to a go-ahead Geno Smith touchdown run with 12 seconds to go. The Seahawks picked up a clutch win over the Cardinals the next week 16-6, then won their next 2 as well over the Jets and Cardinals again. All of a sudden, the Seahawks were 8-5 and had a huge Sunday night matchup at home against the 9-4 Packers. The game just straight up did not go in Seattle's way at all. They struggled to move the ball. Geno Smith threw an interception, and the defense could not slow down the Packers as they jumped out to a 23-6 lead in the 3rd quarter, and then later went on to win 30-13. The Seahawks dropped the next one to the 12-2 Vikings at home as well, 27-24. So at 8-7, the Seahawks' playoff chances were slim and none. Essentially playing playoff games from this point on, the Seahawks went into Chicago and played in one of the games of all time and came out on top 6-3 over the Bears. Then they headed into LA for the season finale against the Rams, who had already clinched the division and would be resting their starters. It turned into an embarrassing struggle against the Rams backups. It took a Noah Fant touchdown with 3 minutes and 19 seconds to go to give the Seahawks the 30-25 win to finish 10-7. But in a competitive NFC wildcard race, it was not enough to get in. The Seahawks missed the playoffs for the 2nd year in a row. Geno Smith ended 2024 throwing 4,320 yards, 21 touchdowns, 15 interceptions, 9 fumbles, and a 93.2 passer rating. Kenneth Walker ended up only playing 11 games, and he rushed for 573 yards and 7 touchdowns. He split carries with Zach Charbonnet, who eventually obviously went on to become the starter for a good chunk of the season, and he rushed for 569 yards and 8 touchdowns. DK Metcalf had a nearly identical season to last. On 66 catches, he racked up 992 yards and 5 touchdowns. But the big story in Seattle's receiving room was 2nd-year receiver Jackson Smith and Jigba, who did have a solid rookie season the year before, but he broke out in year 2, tallying 100 catches, 1,130 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Heading into the 2025 offseason, Seattle was a super tough team to gauge. Sure, they won 10 games last year, but they missed the playoffs, and they played in a very tough NFC West division. But that NFC West division was really tough in part to Seattle themselves. So really difficult to pinpoint what exactly Seattle was going to do this offseason. There were rumors, sure, mainly around DK Metcalf, given the 2 prior seasons, whether you could call that struggling or making the most of his minimal production, whatever you wanted to look at it. The fact of the matter was his past 2 seasons were iffy, and JSN was breaking out in year 2, so a lot of rumors around him, but nothing really for sure as far as what Seattle was going to do this offseason. The first move Seattle made was a stunner, as they sent quarterback Geno Smith to the Las Vegas Raiders for a 3rd-round pick in that year's draft. I mean, sure, 2024 was the worst of Smith's tenure as Seattle's quarterback, but nothing indicated that the Seahawks would go in this direction. So, add finding another quarterback short or long term, whatever it might be, to Seattle's do list this offseason. The next was not quite as off the board, as they sent DK Metcalf in a 2025 6th-round pick to the Pittsburgh Steelers for a 2025 2nd and 7th-round pick. Again, there were trade rumors swirling around Metcalf, especially with the breakout of Jackson Smith and Jigba in 2024, but Seattle officially went all in on JSN being their guy in the receiver room. And a longtime Seahawks wide receiver Tyler Lockett also departed in free agency. With the moves, free agency all of a sudden became critical for Seattle. At quarterback, the Seahawks made a huge gamble, signing Vikings quarterback Sam Darnold off the heels of the best season of his career to a 3-year, $100.5 million contract. What made this a gamble was that up until this last year with the Vikings, Darnold had shown nothing but being a career backup at best, until he led the Vikings to a 14-3 season in 2024. The Seahawks also signed former Rams wide receiver Cooper Kupp to a 3-year, $45 million contract, and veteran defensive end DeMarcus Lawrence to a 3-year, $42 million contract. At the draft with the 18th pick, Seattle helped out the O-line, selecting guard out of North Dakota State Gray Zabel. Then in the second round, Seattle traded up with their second-round pick, along with a third, to go up to pick 35, where they selected safety out of South Carolina, Nick Emanwari. Coming into the season, the Seahawks were projected to win around 8 games again and were given the 18th best Super Bowl odds. And after week 1, the questions around Seattle, Darnold, they all seemed to be reinforced, as they lost 17-13 to the 49ers, capped off with a botched snap from Darnold on their final drive. And after a couple wins in a row, Seattle dropped another one in week 5 to what many believe to be a contender in the Buccaneers, 38-35, dropping Seattle to 3-2. At this point, many believe we were in for a similar season from the Seahawks. Nothing crazy, a playoff spot if the cards fell their way, but nothing out of the ordinary. The Seahawks upset the upstart 4-1 Jaguars 20-12 in Jacksonville the next week, and never looked back. Coming out of their bye at a 6-2 mark, Seattle went into Washington, D.C. and made a statement on Sunday night against the Commanders, blitzing out to a 31-7 lead at halftime, before later winning 38-14. 2 days later, Seattle sent a 4th and 5th round pick to the Saints to pick up speed threat wide receiver Rashid Shaheed, who played for Seattle offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak in New Orleans. The win streak did come to an end in their first meeting with the Rams in week 11, 21-19, but this only proved to be a minor setback for Seattle. The Seahawks rolled the next 3 weeks, then eked out a close win, somewhat embarrassingly, against the recently unretired Phillip Rivers and the Colts in week 15, which set up a massive game in a rematch against the equally 11-3 Rams, with the winner gaining control of not only the NFC West, but the NFC's 1 seed as well. The game was back and forth through halftime, with the score reading 16-14 in the Rams' favor midway through the third quarter. However, a Sam Darnold interception set up the Rams with a drive they'd score on, making it 23-14. Seattle punted again, then the Rams scored again to make it 30-14, highlighted by a 58-yard catch by Puka Nacua. On the following drive, Sam Darnold threw his second interception of the night, and with the clock reading 9 minutes and 48 seconds to go, this game looked over. However, Seattle and their vaunted defense finally forced a 3-and-out, then on the punt, Rashid Shaheed housed it for a 58-yard touchdown, and Sam Darnold hit Cooper Kupp on a 2-point conversion to make it 30-22. Seattle's defense finally looked like itself as they forced another 3-and-out, then on a 31-yard rush from Shaheed, then a 26-yard touchdown to A.J. Barner. Seattle made it 30-28. On the 2-point attempt, Sam Darnold appeared to have his pass knocked incomplete. However, upon review, Darnold's pass was a backwards lateral, and since the ball ended up in the end zone, in which Zach Charbonnet by instinct just picked the ball up, the conversion was good, tying the game at 30. Seattle forced another 3-and-out, but then went 3-and-out themselves. Then, highlighted by a 27-yard completion to Terrence Ferguson with an additional 15 tacked on from an unnecessary roughness penalty, the Rams drove into field goal range. Though it cost them 2 timeouts, Seattle's defense bent, but it didn't break, forcing a 48-yard field goal that the Rams missed with 2 minutes and 7 seconds to go. Seattle couldn't convert as they went 3-and-out again before Seattle's defense forced another Rams punt as regulation ended all squared at 30. Seattle won the toss and deferred to the Rams, who went right down the field and scored on a 41-yard touchdown to Puka Nacua, making it 37-30 in the Rams' favor. Seattle went and did the same thing, driving down the field and scoring on a 4-yard Jackson Smith and Jigba touchdown to make it 37-36. Citing that as the Rams had taken the first meeting, Seattle knew that a tie would do them no good, so they opted to go for 2 and the win, and that's exactly what they did. Darnold found, of all people, backup tight end Eric Saubert in the end zone for a walk-off winner, sending Seattle to 12-3 and the Rams down to 11-4. The Seahawks won their final two against the Panthers and 49ers as well to finish 14-3, winning the West and ensuring the NFC playoffs ran through Seattle. Sam Darnold wrapped up the year, proving that 2024 was not a fluke, throwing for 4,048 yards, 25 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, and a 99.1 passer rating. Kenneth Walker had a strong bounce-back season, rushing for 1,027 yards and 5 touchdowns. But the big story once again was Jackson Smith-Njigba. With being trusted as Seattle's number one option, he exploded. He caught 119 passes for 1,793 yards and 10 touchdowns, and later took home the Offensive Player of the Year award. And Seattle was a team built on their defense, dubbed the Dark Side. What an awesome nickname, man. They allowed the least amount of points amongst defenses and the sixth least amount of offensive yards. After earning the 1 seed and their week off, the Seahawks got matched up with a familiar face in the 6th seed San Francisco 49ers. The Niners were a much different team this time around, though, as injuries had taken their toll throughout the season, which is why the Seahawks were heavy favorites heading into this game. In sports, we see the term over before it started, honestly quite a bit. It's a bit of a cliche, but with this game, it's actually true. Rashid Shaheed housed the opening kickoff 95 yards, and this game was never a contest. Seattle won 41-6, leaving no room for interpretation. This matched Seattle up with another familiar face in the LA Rams, a winner-take-all rubber match with a spot to the Super Bowl on the line. The game started much like their Week 16 matchup, back and forth through the half, with Seattle leading 17-13 at the break. But when Seattle opened up the second half with a touchdown, it put LA in a deep hole. Seattle matched every LA score with one of their own, and by the time the fourth quarter arrived, Seattle's defense went into full lockdown mode. Up 31-27, LA was driving, but Seattle once again bent but didn't break. On a 4th and 4 from the Seattle 6-yard line, they forced an incompletion with 4 minutes and 54 seconds left. And Seattle's offense ran quite a bit of clock. When LA got the ball back with 25 seconds left at their own 7, Seattle only had to stop them a couple more plays, which is exactly what they did. The Seahawks beat the Rams 31-27 to advance to Super Bowl 60. In the Super Bowl awaited the upstart New England Patriots, led by second-year quarterback and MVP candidate Drake May. Patriots, though, had a reputation this season of being somewhat fraudulent, as they had an easy schedule from being 4-13 the year prior, and just made the Super Bowl off the backs of beating the Broncos in the AFC Championship, who were forced to start their backup quarterback. Not that this Seattle team really ever made any, but there really weren't any excuses, and they were expected to win. And on the biggest stage, the dark side had its finest hour. Enough so that a 12-0 Seattle lead in the beginning stages of the third quarter felt insurmountable. Seattle's defense racked up 6 sacks and 3 takeaways, one of which being a Julian Love interception to thwart a possible Patriots comeback, and a scoop and score from Uchenna Nwosu to officially ice the game. What's not to get lost in the defense's performance was that of Kenneth Walker. On 27 carries, he rushed for 135 yards and tallied another 26 yards through the air. Seattle beat New England thoroughly 29-13 and brought home the franchise's second Super Bowl championship. Kenneth Walker was named MVP, and Mike McDonald became the youngest head coach in NFL history to win the Super Bowl. When the 2026 offseason got going, the Seahawks were hit pretty hard by the cost of winning, as they saw a number of key departures. Offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak took the Raiders head coach job. Running back and reigning Super Bowl MVP Kenneth Walker signed with the Chiefs. Cornerback Tariq Woolen signed with the Eagles. And edge rusher Boye Mafe signed with the Bengals. At the draft, with the 32nd pick, Seattle looked to fill the hole that Kenneth Walker left, selecting Notre Dame running back Jadarian Price, hoping to reestablish their 1A, 1B backfield with himself and Zach Charbonnet. So that all leads us to the present day as we head into 2026. Obviously, as the defending Super Bowl champion, Seattle is amongst the legit contenders in the NFL. And when I personally look back, I think it's so fascinating how Seattle constructed this Super Bowl winning roster and this dominating roster as well. The Seahawks, and more specifically GM John Schneider, made gamble after gamble, ballsy decision after ballsy decision. And as I said in the intro, they all worked out as well as they possibly could have, because obviously Seattle is sitting pretty with their second Lombardi in franchise history right now. And I think Schneider, of course, deserves a ton of credit for all these, but also the entire Seahawks front office and personnel and scouting department. All of them played a huge role in building this roster that Seattle has now. But I ask now, really, just how sustainable is it? I think Seattle is definitely due for some regression in 2026, and I throw that around a little lightly. I still think they're going to win 11, 12 games, but by definition, that's regression for you. But yes, with everyone they lost in free agency, they are objectively a weaker team than last year. Going running back in round 1 with the longevity of the position is always a gamble, so we'll have to see how that plays out with Jadarian Price here, both in this year and in the years following. Really, on top of not paying Kenneth Walker after arguably his best season as a Seahawk, we're going to have to see how that gamble plays off and how all that plays out for Seattle. And with adding all the vets to what turned out to be one of the best defenses in the league last year, most specifically DeMarcus Lawrence, we're going to have to see how long that can continue on for him and if that's going to carry into this upcoming season. Can they continue the dominance, or is the regression going to hit him pretty hard next year? Again, we're going to have to wait and see, but regardless of how this season goes for him, Seattle's gambles, they paid off because Seattle ended up with the ultimate prize. They struck gold, and it brought them home a championship. But that is it for me. If you have any thoughts of your own on the Seahawks, feel free to drop them in the comments. Any thoughts on what I said and went through with the Seahawks, feel free to also drop them in the comments. If you like what you're seeing, feel free to like and subscribe. It's completely optional, but greatly appreciated. That is it for me, and I'll see you in the next one.
I've got nothing for you here. It's going to drop back. And they're going to have a crossing route in here eventually. But there's just no way that ball was going to be completed. I don't think it got hit.
No.
And it really wasn't that close to desperation time yet to where you just have to put it in harm's way.